Why you remain emotionally relevant to a married man, Carl Jung. Have you ever wondered why he comes back? Why, even though you're married, even though you've had a lifetime with someone else, do you still occupy such a powerful space in his mind? It's not about beauty. It's not about availability. It's about something that Carl Jung's psychology revealed decades ago that most women are completely unaware of. There is an invisible psychological force that makes certain men unable to forget you, even when they should. And most disturbingly, you may be feeding it without knowing it. While the wife offers stability, you represent something that stirs deep layers of the male psyche. Something he doesn't find at home, something that makes him feel alive in a dangerous and irresistible way. In this video, I'm going to reveal what Carl Jung discovered about the psychological dynamics that keep you relevant in his life, and most importantly, why it happens so much more than you might think. What you will discover can completely change your perspective on this situation. 1. What the wife doesn't awaken in him, and you awaken without realizing it. The difference is not in what she does wrong or what you do right. It is in the psychological place that each one occupies in his emotional structure. With his wife, he built a predictable routine full of bills to pay, decisions about the children, discussions about which sofa to buy. Life has become an automatic gear where the two work more as survival partners than as two people in love. When he's with you, that charge disappears. You don't demand a position. You don't demand that he solve domestic problems. You don't question where he was or why it took him so long to respond. This absence of pressure creates a space where he can simply exist without social masks. Jung called this persona suspension, that character we all need to play in everyday life to be accepted. With you, he doesn't have to be the responsible provider, the exemplary husband, or the present father. He can just be himself, with all the imperfections and desires he hides from the world. This freedom is addictive because it touches on something that all human beings seek, to be accepted without having to perform. And the more the marriage routine becomes heavy, the more he associates you with lightness and escape. But there is another crucial factor that most ignore. You awaken in him an emotional intensity that was lost long ago in the official relationship. Not because you are prettier or more interesting, but because the very structure of the forbidden generates adrenaline. Every hidden message, every risky encounter, every stolen moment produces a chemical discharge in his brain that mimics the early stages of infatuation. Wife is associated with security and stability, feelings that are important, but they don't produce the same emotional activation. You are associated with novelty and risk, elements that keep the nervous system on constant alert. And the male brain, biologically programmed to seek out new stimuli, interprets this activation as proof of a special connection, when in fact, it is just brain chemistry responding to danger and the unknown. 2. The psychological shadow, the side of him that only you know. Every human being carries within himself aspects that have been rejected, repressed, or hidden throughout life. Jung called this the shadow, the part of the personality that we don't show to the world because we learned that it wouldn't be accepted. In marriage, especially after years of living together, many men completely bury this shadow to maintain domestic peace and live up to social expectations. He hides the anger he feels when he is charged, disguises the boredom that routine causes, represses the urge to be irresponsible and impulsive. Over time, this mask becomes so heavy that he no longer even recognizes who he really is underneath it. And then you appear, and unknowingly you become the safe space where that shadow can finally breathe. With you, he allows himself to complain about the life he has built. He admits thoughts that he would never say out loud to his wife. It reveals frustrations, fears, and desires that it has kept locked up for years. This revelation creates a powerful sense of intimacy because he's showing parts of him that no one else sees. And the more he opens up, the more emotionally dependent he becomes on this dynamic. What makes this even more complex is that you don't judge these dark parts of it. While the wife may criticize, confront, or try to correct you, you simply accept it. This unconditional acceptance works as a balm for the male psyche that is constantly being tested and evaluated in the outside world. He doesn't have to be better with you. He can be exactly who he is, with all the flaws included. But there is a silent danger in this dynamic. By becoming the repository of his shadow, you take on a role that shouldn't be yours. You become the emotional outlet that allows him to continue living a divided life without having to face his internal conflicts for real. And the longer this lasts, the more difficult it becomes for him to integrate these rejected parts in a healthy way, because you offer a temporary solution that avoids the real psychological work of self-knowledge and transformation. If you want to understand why you remain emotionally relevant to a married man, it's an unconscious dynamic, explained by Carl Jung. Jungmethod, pinned in the first comment. 3. Because you represent the freedom he lost. When a man gets married, he makes a series of commitments that go far beyond romantic love. He accepts financial, social, and emotional responsibilities that drastically limit his individual autonomy. Life stops being about what he wants and becomes about what the couple needs, what the family demands, what society expects. This transition, while necessary to build stability, imprisons a fundamental part of male identity. You enter this story representing everything he gave up. You are the living memory of when life still had infinite possibilities, when every day could be an adventure, when he didn't have to ask permission or explain his desires. In his mind, you're not just a woman. You're a symbol of lost youth, of spontaneity turned into planning, of pleasure that's been replaced by obligation. This association happens even if you've never verbalized any of it. It is the very structure of the relationship that creates this meaning. Every encounter with you is an act of rebellion against the prison he himself built. Each message exchanged is a silent declaration that he can still make choices based purely on desire, not responsibility. Every moment by your side is a temporary escape from the suffocating identity of husband and provider. Jung understood that human beings need spaces of psychological freedom in order not to get sick. When all areas of life become controlling and limiting, the psyche desperately seeks some escape valve, and you became that valve. The problem is that this freedom is illusory. It doesn't change anything in the real structure of his life. It only offers a temporary reprieve that soon requires another dose. And the more he seeks that sense of freedom through you, the more dependent he becomes on this dynamic. It is like a drug that offers an altered state of consciousness without solving the underlying problem. True freedom would come from facing the choices he has made, renegotiating the terms of the marriage, or taking the consequences of his decisions. But it takes courage and inner work that most men are unwilling to do. It's easier to keep you as a secret oasis in the wilderness of everyday life. The 4. The role of the other woman in the male unconscious, according to Jung. Jung discovered that every man carries within him an unconscious image of the feminine that he calls anima. This image was formed throughout his life, influenced by his mother, his first passions, the movies he watched, the books he read. The anima represents not only a real woman, but a set of emotional, intuitive, and creative qualities that a man projects onto the external world. When he marries, he usually chooses a partner who partially corresponds to this internal image. In the early years, the wife seems to carry all these magical qualities that the anima represents. But over time, the reality of everyday life deconstructs this projection. She stops being the mysterious goddess and becomes an ordinary person with flaws, bad moods, and predictable routines. The anima needs to find another place to manifest itself. And then you appear. Without carrying the weight of everyday reality, you become the perfect canvas for him to project all that fantasy of the ideal feminine again. You don't have to do his laundry. You don't argue about money. You don't see him sick or tired. You exist only in the magical moments when he's mentally available for romance and fantasy. This makes you naturally fit the anima's image better than the wife ever will. But this projection has nothing to do with who you really are. He doesn't love you for your true essence. He loves the image he's built about you, an image that says more about his inner world than it does about your reality as a person. If you were together in the real routine, washing dishes and paying bills, eventually the same disillusionment would happen. The anima would migrate again to another woman who could still carry the fantasy intact. Jung warned that this constant search for anima projected onto external women prevents men from doing the most important work, integrating these feminine qualities within themselves. Instead of developing his own intuition, sensitivity, and creativity, he keeps pursuing it through relationships that inevitably disappoint. And you, without realizing it, become part of this neurotic cycle that never resolves his internal conflict, only postpones the confrontation necessary for true psychological maturity. 5. The projection of the anima. You as a mirror of the ideal feminine. The projection of the anima creates an extremely powerful psychological dynamic that needs to be understood in depth. When a man looks at you and feels that inexplicable attraction, that feeling that you're special in a way that he can't describe, what's happening isn't recognition, it's projection. He is seeing in you qualities that exist only in his imagination, created over decades of emotional and cultural conditioning. This idealized image of the feminine often includes characteristics that he has repressed in himself. If he was taught from childhood that man cannot be sensitive, the anima will carry all the sensitivity he rejected. If he learned that showing vulnerability is weakness, the anima will be the depository of all the fragility that he does not allow himself to feel. When he finds you, he unconsciously believes that you naturally possess everything he lost in the process of becoming a man. This explains why married men often describe the other woman as someone who understands them in a unique way, who completes what is missing. It's not that you actually complete it, it's that you carry the projection of fragmented parts of his soul that he hasn't integrated yet. And the more he deposits this projection on you, the more magical and irreplaceable you seem in his eyes. The dark side of this dynamic is that you can never fully match that image, because it's not human, it's archetypal. It is a fantasy constructed by the male collective unconscious over millennia, fueled by myths of muses, goddesses, and femme fatales that exist only in the symbolic realm. When you act in an ordinary human real way, you inevitably disappoint the projection, and that's when he can start looking for another woman to carry the fantasy again. Understanding that you are a mirror of his anima, not a complete person in his eyes, is liberating and painful at the same time. Liberating because you realize that you don't have to fight to maintain an impossible image. Painful because it reveals that what he feels is not true love for who you are, but fascination with an image that he himself created. And as long as you allow yourself to be a screen for this projection, you will be impeding both his psychological growth and your own. And Bishu 6. Emotional addiction disguised as deep connection. There is a crucial difference between genuine connection and emotional dependence masquerading as love. What keeps you emotionally relevant in his life is often not the quality of the bond between you, but rather an addictive pattern that his brain has learned to look for. Every time he feels the emptiness of married life, the boredom of routine, or the pressure of responsibilities, his brain automatically seeks the relief you represent. This pattern works just like any other addiction. There is an emotional trigger, usually loneliness, frustration, or boredom. Then comes the compulsion to look for you, to start a conversation, to make an appointment. Then consumption happens. The interaction with you that brings immediate pleasure and temporary forgetfulness of problems. And finally, the momentary relief that soon turns into guilt or emptiness, restarting the cycle again. Jung observed that emotional addictions often fill empty spaces in the psyche that should be filled by self-knowledge and personal development. Instead of facing the existential emptiness of passionless marriage, instead of questioning the choices that brought you here, instead of doing the inner work necessary for real transformation, he uses you as anesthesia. And the more he resorts to this pattern, the stronger the neural association between emotional discomfort and the search for you becomes. What's more dangerous is that this addictive dynamic often masquerades as a deep connection. He interprets the intensity of desire as proof of true love. It confuses the compulsion to look for you with genuine longing. He believes that the emotional discharge he feels next to him is evidence of a special connection, when in fact it is just the neurochemical pattern of addiction manifesting itself. The human mind is extremely skilled at creating romantic narratives to justify compulsive behaviors, and you may also be stuck in this addictive cycle without realizing it. The validation you receive when they come to you, the feeling of being wanted, the temporary power of being chosen even partially, all of this activates the same reward circuits in your brain. You both may be feeding each other a toxic emotional dependency while believing you are living a great love story. The truth only comes out when you try to pull away and realize the force of the compulsion that keeps you stuck. 7. Because he can't choose, and never will. The paralysis of choice that keeps him torn between two women is not a weakness of character. It is the result of a psychological structure that needs both situations to keep functioning. In marriage, he has security, stability, social acceptance, and a concrete basis of life. With you, he has emotion, novelty, escape, and validation of his own masculinity. Choosing means losing half of what he needs psychologically. If he chooses to be alone with his wife, he loses the vital element that makes him feel alive, desired, and free. He loses the escape valve that makes the oppressive routine bearable. He loses the space where he can be vulnerable without consequences. It loses the adrenaline that disguises the existential emptiness of middle age. Without you, he would have to face the reality of the marriage he has built, and that requires a courage that most do not have. If he chooses you, he loses all the life structure that took him years to build. He loses his home, his routine with his children, his family's respect, his social identity as a respectable married man. More importantly, it loses the emotional security that only decades of living together can create. And there's an unconscious fear that if you became the official wife, all the magic would be lost. You would be contaminated by the same routine that killed the passion in today's marriage. Jung understood that human beings often seek in the external what they should integrate internally. Instead of developing within himself the capacity to feel emotion in stability or to create security and freedom, he divides these qualities between two women. One carries the responsibility, the other carries the passion. This allows him to live both experiences without doing the psychological work of unifying them within his own personality. The painful truth is that as long as both exist as options, he will never choose definitively. His own indecision becomes comfortable because it allows him to avoid facing the real consequences of any path. He gets stuck in a psychological limbo where he can have both experiences without fully assuming either of them. And the more time he spends in this division, the more difficult it becomes to make a real choice, because his identity has fragmented in such a way that choosing would be like amputating part of himself. 8. How to break this cycle without losing your personal power. Breaking this dynamic doesn't necessarily mean ending the relationship abruptly or dramatically. It means first regaining your own psychological integrity that has been gradually eroded by accepting emotional crumbs disguised as great love. The first step is brutal honesty with yourself about what you're really getting out of this situation and the true price you're paying for it. You need to recognize that as long as you are available as an emotional outlet for him, you block your own possibilities of building something real with someone who can completely choose you. Every message you reply to, every date you accept, every empty promise you believe is reinforcing a pattern where you accept less than you deserve. And the longer this lasts, the more normalized this pattern becomes in your psyche. Jung always emphasized that true psychological growth requires confronting the shadow. And your shadow in this story may include aspects you avoid looking at. Perhaps you're also using this situation to avoid real vulnerability. Maybe the fact that he's never completely available protects you from genuine intimacy that scares you more than you admit. Maybe you gain something from this dynamic that you don't want to give up. Power, validation, a sense of superiority over your wife. Breaking the cycle means setting firm boundaries based on your own worth, not its behavior. It means to stop waiting for him to change, wake up, or finally choose you. It means recognizing that you have total control over your own life and that continuing in this situation is your choice.